He was grounded, rational, and completely in control of his life. That was until Sarah entered the picture about 8 years ago. At first, Sarah seemed lovely, if a bit ambitious. She grew up in a household that didn't have much, and she often talked about wanting the finer things in life. I didn't think much of it at the time. Who doesn't want to be comfortable? They got married, and David bought a stunning house in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. He was the sole provider, which was a choice they made together so Sarah could focus on her influencer aspirations. For a few years, things were stable, but Sarah was never truly satisfied with the stable life David provided. She started spending hours every day scrolling through the feeds of wealthy socialites, comparing our modest but comfortable reality to their staged perfection. The mask started to slip slowly. It wasn't an overnight change, but a gradual erosion of David's values. Sarah's social media presence didn't take off the way she expected, yet she began acting as if she were already a millionaire. It started with small things, a $3,000 handbag here, a weekend at a 5-star spa there. David would come to me exhausted, mentioning that the credit card bills were getting a bit tight. But he always defended her, saying she just needed to look the part to be successful. He began working overtime, taking on extra projects and sacrificing his sleep just to keep up with the mounting interest on their cards. The real downward spiral began about 18 months ago when Sarah decided that their basic life was holding her back. She convinced David that in order to truly make it, they needed to project an image of extreme wealth. She didn't want to just look successful, she wanted to live like royalty. She argued that people only follow winners, and to be a winner, you had to look like you had already won. Her started dipping into their savings to fund her content. I watched from the sidelines as they went on 3 international vacations in 6 months. Paris, Dubai, the Maldives. All while Sarah posted photos of her luxury lifestyle, to a following that barely cracked 10,000 people. These weren't just vacations, they were staged productions. They stayed in suites that cost $5,000 a night, hired professional photographers to follow them through the streets of Paris, and ate at restaurants where the bill for one dinner could have paid my mortgage for 2 months. I tried to talk to David. I sat him down and asked him how they were affording all of this, and he looked me in the eyes with a hollow expression and said they were investing in their future. I told him that a future is built on equity and savings, not on Instagram likes and business class plane tickets. He snapped at me, telling me I didn't understand the modern economy, and that Sarah knew what she was doing. He told me I was stuck in the past, and that I didn't want to see him succeed. That was the first time we ever really fought, and the distance between us only grew as Sarah began whispering in his ear that I was toxic for questioning their vision. Then came the bombshell that shattered everything. Sarah decided that she needed a rebranding fund. She claimed that if she had $700,000 in liquid cash, she could launch a luxury brand that would make them tens of millions. She had no business plan, no prototypes, and no manufacturing contacts, just a vision of her face on a billboard. But they didn't have $700,000 in the bank. What they had was a house with nearly that much in equity. I remember the day David told me they were putting the house on the market. I nearly fainted. I asked him where they would live, and he said they would rent a high-end penthouse to match Sarah's brand. I begged him not to do it. I told him that the house was his safety net, his only real asset, and the fruit of a decade of hard work. Sarah was in the room during this conversation, and she looked at me with such coldness, saying that I was limiting David's potential with my poverty mindset. She told David that parents like me were the reason people stayed average, and that they needed to take big risks for big rewards. David chose her. He sold the house. The sale went through, and after paying off the remaining mortgage, they walked away with a little over $700,000. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would put most of it in a trust or a high-yield account to at least keep the capital safe. I was wrong. Within weeks, they moved into a penthouse that cost $12,000 a month in rent. It was in a glass tower overlooking the city, complete with a private elevator and a 24-hour concierge. Sarah started buying jewelry that cost more than my annual pension. Diamond-encrusted watches and designer bracelets that she flaunted in every video. She threw lavish parties for industry people, who were really just other wannabe influencers looking for a free drink and a nice backdrop for their own photos. I was never invited to these parties. I was the embarrassing mother who lived in a small, 3-bedroom house and wore clothes from the mall. David stopped calling me entirely. I would see glimpses of their life through Sarah's public profile. The designer clothes, the leased Lamborghini, the constant stream of expensive champagne. It was a fevered dream of consumerism. I spent many nights crying, wondering how my sensible son had been brainwashed into thinking this was sustainable. I would check her profile every day, not because I wanted to see the luxury, but because I was looking for the cracks in the facade. They appeared sooner than even I expected. Sarah's luxury brand turned out to be a line of cheap, private label skincare that she tried to sell for $200 a bottle. Nobody bought it. Instead of pivoting or admitting defeat, she doubled down, spending even more on advertising and launch events that were essentially just parties for her friends. It took exactly 11 months for the money to vanish. $700,000, plus David's 6-figure salary, all gone. The penthouse rent went unpaid for 2 months. The Lamborghini was repossessed from the parking garage in front of all their neighbors. And Sarah's brand never even launched a second product because she spent the startup capital on the lifestyle instead of the business. This brings me back to the current situation. 2 days ago, David called me for the first time in months. He didn't sound like the confident investor he claimed to be. He sounded broken, small, and terrified. He told me they were being evicted, and that he had used his last few dollars to settle some of Sarah's private debts with people who were threatening to sue them. He told me he was bankrupt. He didn't ask if they could stay with me. He didn't ask if I was okay or if I had room. He told me. He said, "Mom, we're coming over on Sunday. We'll need the guest room and the basement for Sarah's wardrobe. It shouldn't be more than a year until we're back on our feet." I was stunned. A year? They blew a fortune, treated me like garbage for trying to save them, and now expect me to fund their recovery while Sarah likely keeps her designer bags and her entitled attitude? I told him I needed to think about it, and he got angry saying, "You're my mother, you're supposed to help me when I'm down." But is this being down? Or is this the consequence of absolute greed? Before I tell you the final confrontation and the decision I made when they showed up at my door, I want everyone to stop and think. If your child intentionally set fire to their life despite your warnings, would you let them bring the smoke into your home? Pause for a second and let me know in the comments. Am I being a cold-hearted parent? Or is it time for some tough love after a $700,000 mistake? I sat in my house all day Sunday, my mind racing. I looked at the guest room. The room I had carefully decorated for when my son might visit for the holidays. It was small, clean, and peaceful. I thought about Sarah's wardrobe filling my basement, about her demands for high-end groceries I couldn't afford, and about the constant filming she would undoubtedly do in my living room, mocking my poverty mindset while living off my dime. When they finally arrived, the car was packed to the roof with designer boxes. Not food, not essentials, just Sarah's stuff. There were boxes from Gucci, Chanel, and Louis Vuitton, all containing things they couldn't afford to keep but refused to sell. David got out, looking older than I'd ever seen him, with deep circles under his eyes and a slumped posture that broke my heart. Sarah stayed in the car, scrolling on her phone as if she were checking into a hotel, not even bothering to look at the house she was about to invade. I met David at the end of the driveway. I didn't let him get to the door. I didn't want him to feel the warmth of the house until we had an understanding. He tried to hug me, but I stepped back and told him we needed to talk right there. I asked him one question. What is the plan to pay me back for the utilities, the food, and the space you'll be taking up? Sarah rolled down the window and chirped. Oh, we can't think about money right now. We're in a mental health crisis because of the stress. We need a safe space to heal, not a bill. That was it. That was the moment my heart turned to stone. I looked at my son and told him that he was welcome to sleep on my couch for 1 week, alone, while he looked for a job in a small apartment, but Sarah was not permitted to step foot in my house. I told him he could stay, but his baggage, both literal and figurative, stayed outside. The explosion was immediate. David started screaming that I was trying to break up his marriage, and that I was being cruel to a woman who was suffering. Sarah got out of the car and began filming me, her face contorted in a fake sob as she narrated to her phone about how her abusive mother-in-law was making them homeless. She actually had the audacity to say that my house was partially David's inheritance anyway, so they had a right to be there. I told them if they didn't leave my property, I would call the police. I told David I loved him, but I would not be the safety net for a woman who despised me and a lifestyle that was built on lies. I told him that as long as he chose her delusions over reality, he couldn't be a part of mine. They eventually drove off, tires screeching, screaming insults that I could hear from inside the house. I've since received dozens of messages from Sarah's fans, the few who are still left, calling me a monster and a boomer who doesn't understand mental health. They've even tried to find my workplace to report me for elder abuse in reverse, which makes no sense, but that's the world they live in. But you know what? For the first time in years, I slept peacefully. I didn't have to worry about someone raiding my fridge or judging my furniture. My son has to learn that you cannot sell your future for a temporary glow and expect others to rebuild the walls you tore down. He needs to realize that Sarah isn't his partner. She's his passenger on a ship she's actively sinking. I am currently blocked by both of them on all platforms. Rumors from a distant cousin say they are staying in a cheap, rundown motel on the edge of town while Sarah tries to sell her bags for cash on resale sites, but she's complaining that the market is too low. It hurts to think of my son in a place like that, but I know that if I had let them in, they would have drained my bank account just like they drained theirs. They would have stayed for years, not months, and I would have ended up losing my home too. I had to set a boundary to save myself, even if it meant losing him for a while. At the end of the day, being a parent doesn't mean being a doormat for your children's poor choices, especially when those choices involve such a staggering amount of waste and disrespect. I have to believe that by standing my ground, I'm giving David the only thing Sarah never could: a reality check. True love isn't enabling a person's destruction. It's being the wall they finally hit so they can stop falling. I'm done being the backup plan for people who only remember I exist when the money runs out. Maybe one day David will come to me alone, without the ego and without the woman who ruined him. And when that day comes, I'll have my arms open. But until then, my door remains locked. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by protecting my home and my peace, and definitely subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up to entitled family members. I'd love to hear your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far by banning the wife, or was I just being fair to myself? I'll be reading the comments to see how you would handle an influencer invasion in your own home. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in the next story.